They tell you the guards don't move. That's the first lie tourists carry home in their camera rolls. This idea that the men standing at Buckingham Palace are somehow less than human. Decorative. Ceremonial furniture and bearskin hats. Something to photograph beside. Something to test. They don't know what I know. I've logged 4,847 shift rotations across 11 years of palace duty. I've filled 14 incident notebooks, the small ones, black covers, my regulation issue, with observations so unremarkable they would bore a stone. Wind direction, crowd density. Whether the pigeons are agitated near the North Gate, which they sometimes are before something goes wrong. And I have never once been able to explain that to a superior without sounding unhinged. I notice things. It's the only currency I have left. So when the tourist walked up to Lance Corporal Daniel Ashworth at 14:23 on a Tuesday in March, chin out, phone raised, and his mate filming from 6 feet back. I noticed. I noticed the way Ashworth's jaw moved, barely. The way his left hand adjusted its grip on the ceremonial rifle by perhaps 2 millimeters. The crowd pressed closer. The tourist said something. What happened in the next 4 minutes will not appear in any official record. The tourist's video never reached the internet. His mate deleted it. Voluntarily, I'm told, though I have my doubts about that word. What I'm about to tell you is what I wrote in Notebook 15. What I wrote exactly. Because someone ought to know what these men actually are. The thing about March at the palace is the cold has a specific texture, not the honest, clean cold of January. This is wet cold, the kind that gets under the collar of your overcoat and settles there like a grudge. I had been standing at the observation post near the East Gate for going on 40 minutes, some fingers wrapped around a paper cup of tea that had surrendered all warmth approximately 32 minutes ago when I first saw the tourist. He was American. I'm not saying that as criticism. I'm saying it because it is observationally relevant. He had the particular brand of confidence that comes from spending a lifetime in a country that has never required him to make himself small in front of anything. Broad-shouldered, a North Face jacket in a color that could only be described as aggressively orange. His phone was up before he'd even fully stopped walking, the way people film things now, not to remember them, but to prove to someone else that they were there. His mate, shorter, in a gray beanie, filming the filmer, stationed himself at a diagonal 6 feet back. Classic formation for content creation. I wrote, 14:23, 2 males, tourists, North Face plus beanie, subject approaching post 3 Alpha, saw standard crowd density, 11 civilians in direct sightline. Lance Corporal Daniel Ashworth was on post 3 Alpha. I want to be precise about Ashworth, because precision matters here, and I owe it to him. He is 26 years old. He has a small scar above his left eyebrow from a training incident he has never fully explained to anyone's satisfaction. His bearskin hat sits fractionally lower on the right side than regulation specifies, which his supervising sergeant has flagged 3 times, and Ashworth has corrected 3 times, and then it migrates back, gradually, across every shift, like it's making a point. He stands 6'1". He is built the way men are built when they've been doing physical work since they were 17. Not gym built, not performance built, but structurally dense, like something that has been compressed over time into a more durable form. His face is completely still. It has been completely still for 2 hours and 17 minutes. The tourist stopped approximately 1 meter from the painted boundary line, the one that is not, technically, a legal boundary, but functions as a social one, the one that says this far, and the performance continues. 1 step further, and something else begins. He looked at his phone. Then he looked at Ashworth. Then he smiled the smile of a man who has watched too many YouTube compilations of guards not reacting to things. And he said, "Bet you can't even blink, mate. His mate laughed. The crowd, 11 civilians, now closer to 16, as people drifted over to watch what was clearly becoming a thing, shuffled with anticipation. I've seen it hundreds of times. The collective lean, the held breath, the way strangers become briefly unified by the shared hope that someone is about to do something stupid enough to be entertaining. Ashworth did not blink. Or rather, Ashworth blinked exactly as often as human physiology requires, which is to say with the mechanical, involuntary regularity of a man who has achieved a state beyond reaction. His eyes were focused on the middle distance, on nothing, on the specific nothing that guardsmen train themselves to inhabit, a cognitive space that is technically present and functionally elsewhere simultaneously. I have asked men how they do it. The answers are always useless. You just go somewhere else, sir. You learn to make time pass differently. One private told me once, with complete seriousness, that he imagined himself as load-bearing architecture. A wall, something that exists to hold a structure up and requires nothing back from the world in return. The tourist stepped over the line, not aggressively, not stupidly. 1 foot, just over, just enough. The move of a man testing a surface, seeing if it holds. The crowd tightened. Ashworth's left hand adjusted its grip on the ceremonial rifle, like 2 millimeters. I wrote it down. I always write it down, the small things, because in 11 years I have learned that the small things are the document of what is actually happening, and the official records are the document of what people agreed to say happened afterward. "Come on, man," the tourist said. His voice had shifted. Less performance now, more genuine curiosity, which is, in my experience, when people become more dangerous rather than less. A genuine curiosity doesn't know when to stop. Just say something. I'm not going to do anything. I just want to know you're a real person. The crowd laughed, not cruelly, almost warmly, the way crowds laugh at something that is, also, underneath, a little bit true. I just want to know you're a real person. I wrote that down too. Because here is what I know about Daniel Ashworth, that the tourist does not. 3 months prior, Ashworth stood post during a credible threat assessment. I cannot be more specific than that in this notebook. Classification concerns. For 6.5 hours without rotation, due to a logistics failure I will not detail here. 6.5 hours in November, during which the threat was real enough that his relief detail was rerouted, and he was informed, via earpiece, in the flattest possible operational language, that he should maintain position and await further instruction. That he maintained position. He awaited instruction. 6.5 hours, and when his relief finally arrived, Ashworth apparently said, "I have this second hand, from Sergeant Okafor, who was there. Thought you'd gotten lost, Sarge." And then he handed over the post and walked, not quickly, to the nearest interior checkpoint, where he sat down on a bench, drank approximately half a liter of water, and said nothing further to anyone for 11 minutes. Then he went back on rotation. The tourist was still talking. Something about respect. Something about how he wasn't trying to be disrespectful. Something that was looping back on itself the way things do when people are performing justification in real time. Ashworth turned his head. Not much. Not dramatically. Just turned it. Degree by degree, until he was looking directly at the tourist. Not through him. At him. The specific, weight-bearing attention of a man who has decided that something requires his notice. The crowd went absolutely silent. I stopped writing. Even the pigeons near the north gate, I looked, had gone still. The tourist's mate, for the first time since I'd been watching, lowered his phone. Ashworth said nothing, but his eyes were doing something I had only seen once before, in a man who had come back from a place I won't name. And what they were doing was this. They were measuring, not with hostility, Not with warning. With the quiet, load-bearing patience of a man who has already decided every outcome and is simply waiting to see which one you choose. The tourist opened his mouth, closed it. Part 2 continues. The silence lasted 4 seconds. I counted. I always count. It's a habit I developed in year 3, when I realized that my own perception of silence was unreliable, that what felt like an eternity of held breath was usually closer to 6 seconds, and what felt like a brief pause was sometimes 20, and my internal clock had been quietly lying to me about duration for my entire adult life. 4 seconds. In those 4 seconds, the tourist did not move. His mate did not raise his phone. The 16-odd civilians surrounding them existed in a collective suspension that I can only describe as the specific social paralysis that occurs when a crowd realizes it has accidentally witnessed something it didn't have a framework for. They came for a reaction. They got attention. Those are not the same thing, and the body knows the difference before the brain does. Ashworth blinked. Once. Deliberate. The blink of a man punctuating a sentence he had not spoken aloud. Then he looked back at the middle distance. He went back to being a wall. The tourist exhaled. A long, deflating breath, the sound of a man releasing something he hadn't known he was holding, and stepped back over the line. He looked at his phone. He looked at his mate, but his mate was already pulling his beanie down lower over his ears in the universal physical gesture of "we're leaving now." Yes, we are. Yeah, the tourist said, to no one in particular. Okay. They left. The crowd dispersed over the following 90 seconds, moving away in the gradual, slightly embarrassed shuffle of people who have just discovered that the thing they gathered to watch was not the kind of spectacle they came for. Someone muttered something I didn't catch. A child asked her mother if the guard was angry, and the mother said, "No, love, he's just working," in a tone that suggested she wasn't entirely sure that was the whole truth. I wrote, 14:31, incident concluded, no escalation. Post 3, Alpha maintains position. Crowd dispersal complete. Then I put my pen down, which I almost never do mid-shift, because I was thinking about something Sergeant Okafor had told me, obliquely, 2 weeks prior, on over instant coffee in the staff corridor that smells permanently of old radiators and the ghost of someone's packed lunch. We'd been discussing, not officially, not in any way that would survive a formal recounting, the question of what the job does to a person. Long term. The ceremonial postings specifically. The standing still while the world performs itself around you. Okafor had said, "They think we're performing." He stirred his coffee. "We're not performing. We're deciding. Every second out there, you're deciding not to react. That's not the same as being unable to react. The whole point is that you could. And you don't." I'd written it in the margin of Notebook 14, not in the official log section, but in the narrow white space beside the printed date, where I sometimes put things I don't know how to categorize. The whole point is that you could. And you don't. I was thinking about that when Ashworth did something I had not seen in 11 years of observation, so he smiled. Not broadly. Not visibly, in any way that a photograph would have captured or that an official review would have noted. A compression at the corners of his mouth, a barely there thing, the kind of expression that lives in the lower face and never reaches the eyes. Not because it's insincere, but because it's private. Contained. Something happening inside the stillness rather than instead of it. Gone in under a second. I almost didn't write it down, and I sat with the pen hovering for a moment, because what does one log, exactly? Subject displayed micro-expression consistent with private amusement at 14:31:47. That would not pass any reasonable review. That reads like the notation of a man who has been in the observation post too long, whose cold tea has curdled his professional objectivity. I wrote it anyway. Small things. What I could not log, because it falls entirely outside the scope of incident documentation, is what I understood in the moment I saw that fractional, invisible smile, which is this: that Ashworth had known, from the second the tourist stepped over the line, exactly what was going to happen. Not because he has some supernatural capacity for prediction, not because he is anything other than a 26-year-old man with a scar above his eyebrow and a hat that won't sit straight, but because he has stood on that post for long enough to know the architecture of a test, or to recognize the shape of a person who needs to know whether you're real. And he had made a choice, not to perform stillness, but to offer something stranger and more unsettling. He had offered the tourist his actual attention. Full, unmediated, unhurried. The attention of a man who has nothing to prove and nowhere to be. The attention that most people, in their ordinary lives, never receive from another human being for 4 consecutive seconds without it being overlaid with agenda or impatience or the low-grade distraction of their own interiority. It is, I have since concluded, one of the more quietly devastating things one person can do to another, to simply look at them, to actually see them, without reaction, without judgment, with just the clean, flat fact of sustained notice. The tourist didn't have a framework for it. Most people don't. So I was still standing at the observation post at 1443 when Corporal Yemi Adisa came to relieve Ashworth for his rotation break. Standard handover. 30 seconds. Ashworth stepped aside, and Adisa stepped in, and the post continued as the post always continues, indifferent to the small human events that accumulate around it, like weather. I watched Ashworth walk toward the interior checkpoint. At the archway he paused, briefly, on the pause of a man who has thought of something and then thought better of it, and looked back. Not at the crowd, not at the post. He looked, for approximately 1.5 seconds, in the direction the tourist had gone. Then he went inside. I wrote nothing in the log, but I turned to the margin, where I keep the things I can't categorize, and I wrote. He looked. 2 words. I stared at them for a long time. Part 3 continues. I found Ashworth in the break room at 15:04. This was not unusual. The interior break room off the east corridor is a depressing rectangle that smells of instant coffee and the particular brand of institutional beige that someone chose for the walls in approximately 1987, and no one has since had either the authority or the motivation to change. There is a vending machine that works intermittently. There are 4 plastic chairs that are never arranged the same way twice, as though they are having a slow and decades-long argument about optimal positioning. Ashworth was sitting in one of them, out of his bearskin, his ceremonial tunic jacket unbuttoned at the collar. He was eating a packet of crisps, salt and vinegar. He had his phone on the table in front of him, face down, which is the posture of a man who is choosing not to look at something. I told myself I was in the break room for the vending machine. The vending machine ate my 50 pence and produced nothing. I stood there a moment. I'm staring at it, which gave me, I am not proud of this, approximately 8 seconds to decide whether I was going to say anything, and I used those 8 seconds very poorly, because what I said was, "Good post today." Ashworth looked up. His expression was the expression of a man who is politely waiting to find out if there is more. "The tourist," I said. "The American. Post 3 Alpha. 1423. Something moved across his face. Not the smile, not the private, an invisible one from the post. Something less performed, and therefore harder to read. He picked up another crisp. ate it. Looked at me with the same quality of attention he had aimed at the tourist 4 hours ago. And I had the disorienting experience of understanding, from the receiving end, why the tourist had stepped back. "You log everything," he said. "Not a question." "I do." "What did you write?" "Incident concluded. No escalation. Post maintains position." He nodded, looked at his phone, still face down. "And that covers it." It wasn't quite a question either. I said, "The official log, yes." He was quiet for a moment. Outside in the corridor, 2 of the domestic staff were having a conversation I couldn't make out. Something about the Thursday schedule. The ordinary business of the building continuing its ordinary business. Indifferent. Ashworth said, "He wanted me to break." "I know." They always frame it as, they want to know if you're real. If you're human. He pulled the crisp packet open wider. What they actually want is to be the one who got through. The one who cracked it. He paused, which I understand. I do. When you can't tell if something has a reaction, there's something in you that wants to be the thing that causes one. I said, "Is that psychology? Did they give you a module on that?" "No," he said. "I had a younger brother." He said it in the flat. A 2-word way of a man delivering a fact that contains a world he has decided not to open in this room. Today. I wrote nothing. There was nothing to write. But I filed it in the place I keep things that don't go in notebooks. The space behind the sternum where the observational record nobody sees is stored. "The thing is," Ashworth said, and now his voice had shifted slightly, the way voices do when people stop performing conversation and start actually having one. "Standing on post, people think you go blank, that you train yourself to go away. And you do, a bit. You have to, but you don't go completely. You're still in there. You're watching. You're—" He searched for the word. "Processing, constantly. You know when someone's going to step over the line 30 seconds before they do. You know from the way they slow down, the way they start narrating to their mates, the way their center of gravity shifts forward." He looked at his hands. 6 hours into a shift, you know what everyone in a 20-meter radius is going to do before they do. You just can't say anything. Can't react. I thought about the threat assessment, the 6.5 hours in November. What it costs to sit inside your own attention for that long with nowhere to put it. "The American," I said, "when you turned your head, when you looked at him directly." I waited. "What were you doing?" Ashworth was quiet for long enough that I thought he wouldn't answer, not giving him what he was actually asking for. He said finally. He said he wanted to know I was real, so I let him see me. Properly. Just looked at him. No performance. No ceremony. Just looked. A pause. Most people aren't ready for that. They think they want contact, but they've spent so long interacting with surfaces that actual attention frightens them. He picked up his phone, turned it face up, looked at whatever was on the screen, put it face down again. A gesture with no resolution. He'll go home," Ashworth said. "He'll tell the story about the guard who stared him down. He'll make it into something it wasn't. A standoff, a power thing. And it'll be a good story." The ghost of the invisible smile again, brief and private. Better than the truth. "What's the truth?" He stood up, began buttoning his collar, the careful routine preparation of a man returning to the machinery of the role. He picked up his bearskin. "He was lonely," Ashworth said. "Bit. In the way people are lonely when they're somewhere famous, with someone they're not quite close enough to say anything real to." He settled the hat on his head, slightly lower on the right, as always. He just wanted a moment of contact with something that wasn't performing. And I gave him that. He looked at me steadily, Then I went back to performing. Because that's the job. He left. I sat in the plastic chair he'd vacated, in the beige break room, next to the vending machine that had eaten my 50 pence. I opened notebook 15. I wrote nothing for a long time. Then I wrote, "The guards are not performing stillness. They are performing nothing. The stillness is what's underneath." I looked at the sentence. I crossed out performing nothing. I wrote, deciding. Somewhere further along the east corridor, a door opened and closed. Rotation change. Post 3 Alpha resumed, as it always resumes, as it will resume tomorrow and the day after. The same post in the same cold, the same crowds arriving with their phones and their tests, and their loneliness dressed up as curiosity. I thought about the way Ashworth had paused at the archway, the way he had looked back in the direction the tourist went. I thought about his younger brother. I did not write either of those things. Some things the notebook keeps for itself. End.